from North Korea with a warning. Pyongyang threatens the U.S. following criticism of its latest missile tests. So, how should President Joe Biden handle one of America's most delicate diplomatic challenges? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Mohammed Jamjoom. North Korea often test fires ballistic missiles and weapons to send a signal to the world. It's a practice experts call weaponized diplomacy. And it appears the latest launches are a message to its traditional foe, the United States. Pyongyang launched 2 short-range missiles into the Sea of Japan on Thursday. Analysts suggest they may be able to carry nuclear warheads. The test was condemned internationally. U.S. President Joe Biden says it violated UN sanctions designed to rein in the North's nuclear program.
We're consulting with our allies and partners, and there will be responses if they choose to escalate. We will respond accordingly. But I'm also prepared for some form of diplomacy, but it has to be conditioned upon the end result of denuclearization.
This drew a sharp rebuke from the official who supervised the test. In a statement, Ri Pyong-chol says the comments were a provocation that revealed Biden's deep-seated hostility towards North Korea. He accused the U.S. of using gangster-like logic to oppose Pyongyang's right to self-defense, and he threatened more action against Washington while vowing to expand the North's military power. The events have drawn attention to how the new U.S. administration with Joe Biden as president will deal with North Korea. The White House has indicated it's likely to reverse the previous administration's policies on North Korea and is in the final stages of a policy review on Pyongyang. U.S. troops have resumed joint military exercises with South Korea, which were canceled by President Donald Trump. North Korean leader Kim Jongun and Trump met 3 times to discuss denuclearization. The talks collapsed without a deal. North Korea wants the U.S. to lift sanctions and end military drills in exchange for curbing its nuclear program. All right, let's bring in our guests from Seoul. Yang Uk, adjunct professor at the Graduate School of National Defense Strategy at Hannam University. From Pusan, also in South Korea, is Robert Kelly, professor of political science and diplomacy at Pusan National University. And in Vienna is Tariq Rauf, former head of the Verification and Security Policy Coordination Office at the International Atomic Energy Agency. Thank you all for joining us. Robert, let me start with you today. At its core, are these missile tests by North Korea essentially the country trying to get the Biden administration's attention, basically saying, hey, we're still here, pay attention to us?
Yes, I think so. North Korea traditionally pulls some kind of stunt when there's a new president in South Korea or a new president in the United States. This is a way of suggesting that North Korea cannot be bullied, North Korea cannot be pushed around. The North Koreans have a sort of an offensive or kind of positive understanding of deterrence, which is to say they don't just sort of build a big army and say, we're impregnable. They also kind of lash out occasionally to prove to us that they're still capable, even though North Korea's economy is pretty far behind and South Korea outpaces it technologically. And so that's how I read these tests. I mean, there's been a lot of sort of media attention in the last week or so. And is this a challenge to Joe Biden and the rest of it? I don't really think we need to overread it too much like that. I think rather this is just sort of North Korea kind of doing the traditional things that it does. We had a brief hiatus there under Donald Trump when Trump personally was meeting with the North Korean leader. But that was pretty rare, and that has sort of fallen apart. So it seems to me, at least, that we're kind of sliding back towards the status quo, the pre-Trump status quo.
Yang, you heard Robert there say that he believes we're sort of sliding back into the pre-Trump status quo when it comes to North Korea and their actions. Let me ask you, I mean, North Korea had been issuing warnings. They had been saying that the U.S. was going to pay a price. Is it at all a surprise that there was first this test of the short-range missiles, and then it was followed by the test of the short-range ballistic missiles?
Yeah, I mean, it's no wonder. I mean, North Korea always has been reacted to the, when U.S. or other countries says something about sanction, they always tend to shoot ballistic missile. But so far, the short-range ballistic missile, I mean, U.S. or other country doesn't care too much, but I mean, it's totally different this time.
Tariq, based on your experience with the IAEA's North Korea program, is there anything that the UN or the IAEA or other international bodies can do to improve the situation?
I don't think so. I think it's now again back in the court of both Washington and Pyongyang to sort this out. Even though many people criticize President Trump for stepping out of the Iran nuclear deal, I personally believe that his North Korea policy of meeting with Kim Jongun 3 times, of having the Singapore Declaration, and at Hanoi, apparently North Korea offered to dismantle the Yongbyon nuclear site, which is nearly 80% of North Korea's nuclear program, but he was stymied by the Pompeo-Bolton team, and we had a failure. So the United Nations, by having more sanctions, or the IAEA, I don't think at the moment are in a position to improve the situation.
Robert, how difficult has this made things for the Biden administration when it comes to its approach to North Korea? And when are we going to be finding out more about the Biden administration's policy going forward toward North Korea?
I think that North Korea is such an established problem now for the United States and South Korea, and also for Japan, that I don't think that a minor sort of acting out like this by North Korea is really sort of a problem. I don't think that it's really fair to sort of say this is a crisis for the Biden administration or something like that, because everybody knew this was coming, right? I mean, we know that we had this sort of unique hiatus because the U.S. president personally, when it was Donald Trump, met with the North Korean leader. But other than that, this is actually quite similar to what North Korea has done basically for decades. And so I don't really think it's fair to suggest that it's a crisis. Biden also doesn't have a lot of good options. And I think everybody in the world really realizes that at this point, Biden can't strike North Korea. Sanctioning North Korea further doesn't really do much good, because we don't really trade or have many economic relations with North Korea in any case anyway, right? So, I mean, Biden is confronted with something, I think, that's fairly expected. So I don't think, unless the Biden people gin this thing up into something big, I think they're probably okay if they just sort of talk to the allies and hold. As for the policy review, I imagine it'll come back in the next month or so. You know, maybe it'll be accelerated now because of this. And I imagine it actually won't tell us anything we don't already know. I mean, if you actually look at U.S. foreign policy towards North Korea since the 60s, it's kind of been the same the whole time, right? Which is sort of containment, isolation, sanction, and deterrence. And you can sort of like change that a little bit on the edges, but you know, our options with North Korea are actually quite limited. There's really not that much we can do. And so here we are having the same discussion we've had for decades, quite honestly.
Yang, what has the response been with regard to South Korean defense mechanisms in the past when it comes to North Korean missile tests, and what is the response now to the most recent tests?
I mean, around the neighboring country?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, well, the first, I mean, the strong response came from Japan. I mean, the Prime Minister Suga himself said that this is the violation of the UN sanction, and with his read, I mean, U.S. also said strongly against this, you know, short-range ballistic missile launch, and well, Japan has a good reason to do this because first, I mean, the Tokyo Olympic is really near, so the any turbulence from the North Korea can be some kind of, you know, obstruction. And then secondly, I mean, as the one of the leading country in Quad, I mean, the Japan wants to, you know, take control of these, you know, the international political situation around Northeast Asia. And so for the China, I mean, it's always the same, because I mean, the Chinese always has been saying that the maintaining peace and stability on the Korean Peninsula, and I mean the resolving issues through dialogue. I mean, that's what they have been saying.
Let me go right now to Tariq. Tariq, where do North Korea's nuclear capabilities stand now? What's the state of the country's nuclear program?
Well, North Korea actually has one of the oldest nuclear programs in the world. They started in 1953. At the moment, they now have a complete nuclear fuel cycle. They have uranium mining, they have uranium enrichment, that is enriching uranium to reactor-grade uranium and also to weapon-grade uranium, which is over 90%. They also have a plutonium separation capability, and they've obviously demonstrated that they can make nuclear warheads. They've carried out 6 nuclear tests. And if one looks at the yields of the 6 nuclear tests, each one of them has been bigger than the previous one. The last test in September 2017 was nearly 140 kilotons. And so North Korea, in its 6 tests, has demonstrated a much more advanced nuclear weapons capability than India or Pakistan did so in 1998. And therefore, this is a full program. And North Korea has created a lot of bargaining chips. US policy towards North Korea, in my view, has been an abject failure, as have sanctions. So we need a new way of dealing with North Korea. President Trump, I think, started down the right line, but then his own bureaucracy and establishment stymied him. So now, as James Clapper, the former director of national intelligence in the US, said a few years ago, it is a reality that North Korea has a nuclear weapon capability and it also has a delivery capability. We need to negotiate with that, and North Korea will retain some form of nuclear weapons capability even after some agreement is reached with the United States and others.
Robert, you were talking earlier about how in some ways this is more business as usual when it comes to North Korea, and the tests that they conduct. How much further do you think Kim Jong-un is going to be willing to go at this stage to get the attention of the White House and also in order to gain leverage with Washington?
That's actually a really excellent question, right? But the North Koreans, I think the North Koreans do want to bargain, right? I think your other guests have sort of hinted at this too. I do actually believe the North Koreans would like to come to the table. They just want a lot more than the U.S. is willing to give up. I think that's the real reason why there's no movement here. I don't think it's because U.S. leadership is sort of soft or flimsy or whatever. I think it's ultimately the North Koreans want a lot and they're going to hold out, and they're in a pretty good position because it's very hard for us to punish North Korea otherwise. So unless the Biden people come and offer something really substantial, when I say substantial, I mean really big. I mean like withdrawing closing a U.S. base and pulling, U.S. air power to South Korea or something. They will ask for a lot, and the Biden people aren't going to offer that, which means in 6 months or something like that, the North Koreans will probably do something like this again. We've seen that kind of cycle in the past, and as long as we can't really hit North Korea, as long as we can't strike it, as long as a bloody nose is too risky, as long as we can't really hit them hard very much with sanctions because North Korea cheats and, a lot of North Korea's economic activity doesn't go through us anyway. I mean, North Korea, it's very hard for us to get our handle on North Korea. And as a result, they can basically hold. And the leadership doesn't care if their population suffers from the sanctions either, right? Because they don't care about their own people. So they can continue to hold. And they're just going to wait and wait and wait and wait until the Americans ultimately offer something really good. And the American public and the U.S. Congress just aren't there yet. But wait 5 years.
Yeah, and I interrupted you a few moments ago as you were starting to talk about China. Let me go ahead and ask you now. We know that North Korea wants to have closer relations with China. What's China's stance at the moment? First of all, how are they viewing, these most recent tests? Secondly, how much closer do they want to be with North Korea?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is always like this. The China's position on this, the sanction issue, it always has been same. They are talking about this, maintaining peace and stability on Korean Peninsula and resolving issues through dialogue and consultation. That's what they have been saying for 30, 40 years. But the thing is that when U.S. or other country wants to, impose sanction, China is the one, who has been, keeping any, discussion, and they hold the sanction, as long as they can, and after that, when only after the U.S. or other country, were subsided a little bit on the sanction, and then China agrees. That's what they have been on, UN sanction. So for China, the North Korea is really, really good strategic card, can be used against United States or Japan. So it's kind of like a really good medium for the offshore balancing. So China will hold the card, as long as they can.
Tariq, what do we know so far about the types of ballistic missiles that were tested by North Korea in the most recent test? There have been reports that North Korea had indicated that these were modified versions of what's called a solid-fueled ballistic missile. Do we know more about that type of missile, perhaps how easy it is to transport or to launch?
So just as with the nuclear program, North Korea has a full suite of ballistic and cruise missiles. They have short-range or battlefield missiles, they have medium-range missiles, and they also have long-range missiles. So apparently 2 of the tests conducted this year were short-range missiles that did not violate UN sanctions. And then the 2 other tests apparently were of a medium-range missile. And I think this was North Korea's way of showing that it was still abiding by its moratorium of no nuclear tests and no long-range ballistic missile tests. I wouldn't focus specifically on the type of missiles that were tested because North Korea has the capability. As regards sanctions, nobody can point a single case in history where sanctions have reversed the WMD, a nuclear, chemical, or biological weapons program in a country. Sanctions did not affect South Africa, didn't affect Iraq, didn't affect Iran, didn't stop India, didn't stop Pakistan, and it's clear they haven't stopped North Korea. So we really need to have a completely new strategy. It also means that the more the sanctions bite, the North Koreans then turn to cybercrime and other ways of getting the money that they need. So they will get what they want. And the leaderships have shown in India, Pakistan, Iran, Iraq, and also North Korea, as one of your guests mentioned, that if the population has to tighten its belt, that's what they will do. And North Korea has also seen how Iraq, Libya, and Iran have been squeezed because they didn't have nuclear weapons. Nobody threatens North Korea with an attack. Nobody says all options are on the table. So North Korea knows. And they also know that India and Pakistan have been accepted as de facto nuclear weapon states. And unfortunately, because of bad policies over the past decades, as I mentioned, the failure of the agreed framework, and so on, we have to now accept this unfortunate reality that we have a 9th country that has a nuclear weapons arsenal and also the means of delivery. And therefore, we need to look at some sort of a phased approach where the DPRK gives us assurance that it will not further build up its missile and nuclear capability, not carry out more long-range missile tests, and not carry out more nuclear weapon tests in return for some sanctions relief, and then we can hope for some form of incremental change or a better balancing of the situation there.
Robert, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin just recently went and visited both Seoul and Tokyo. I want to ask you about how that trip was received by Japanese and South Korean counterparts. Obviously, a big topic of discussion was North Korea and North Korea's nuclear program. Were Japan and South Korea reassured by that visit?
I think they were. I think they were. I think a lot of it, at least in the first 6 months, maybe 8 months with the Biden people, and not just here in Asia, but with lots and lots of U.S. allies, is just sort of cleaning up the damage of the Trump administration. I mean, President Trump was erratic. He was unpredictable. He said all sorts of outlandish things on television. He didn't care for U.S. allies. He thought they were shirkers and free riders and everything. And so I think a big part of what the Biden trip was, or the Biden people trip recently was just showing everybody it's like, we're back. The Americans are here. Things are normal again. We're going to be sort of like running U.S. foreign policy with professionals who are competent, who know what's going on and things like that, who are actually vested in, who actually believe the United States should stay in Asia and things like that. So I think that was actually probably like 60 or 70% of it, is just proving to the Japanese and South Koreans like the Americans are normal again after this sort of like weird hiatus. And that's why I don't think you heard anything really spectacular. It was a lot of sort of like alliance reassurance, we're here and maybe we should think about doing military drills, and why don't we talk to the North Koreans, and what about China, and things like that. All that is sort of just par for the course for the U.S. relationships out here in Asia. So I actually thought the meeting was actually pretty unspectacular, which is actually a good thing. It's actually really good when America's alliance meetings are not actually fireworks like they were for the last 4 years. So I think it was actually fine.
Young, I saw you nodding along to some of what Robert was saying there, so I wanted to see if you had a response, but I also wanted to ask you about the same thing, which was from your perspective, how did Japan, how did South Korea, how did other U.S. allies in the region feel about that trip, and were they reassured when it comes to the U.S. stance toward North Korea?
Yeah, of course. I mean, the Japan would do it, but I mean, for the South Korean government, it's kind of like there's a little bit of confusion. Well, I mean, everyone thinks that the 2+2 talk in Korea went well, but I mean, some of the report says that something otherwise. I mean, there's some disagreement between U.S. and Korea against this North Korean nuclear problem. The thing is that current administration of the South Korea is kind of sympathetic to the North Korea and still wants to, summit talk with Kim Jongun. So South Korean government is very much careful in comments on North Korean sanctions or some other thing. Even the North Korean human rights issues are not fully or freely addressed in this government. So I think that not everyone is on the same page. So next week, there will be a trilateral tour in Washington between the U.S., Japan, and Korea. So from South Korea, the director of the National Security Council will be over there. So there will be some, agreement what I should expect.
Tariq, what's the level of concern about the idea that if the U.S. were to re-enter into talks with North Korea, that North Korea might just, try to string that process out and utilize that time as a way to bolster their nuclear program?
Well, the nuclear program is already as advanced as it can be. Apparently, they tested a thermonuclear weapon in September 2017. So what more is left? So this argument that North Korea will string it on and then further advance their nuclear program, to me, doesn't really make very much sense. People believe that they may have 30, 40, or maybe 50 nuclear weapons. They can make between 7 to 12, apparently, a year. So they are pretty comfortable. So we need a really more realistic approach. People like Dr. Siegfried Hecker, the former director of Los Alamos Laboratory, who's visited North Korea several times, who was shown the enrichment facility. He's at Stanford University. A few years ago, he proposed quite a realistic phase program. Robert Einhorn wrote a recent article for 38 North that is also talking about a phased nuclear program. And I recall the op-ed written in the Wall Street Journal in August of 2017 by Secretaries Tillerson and Mattis, where they mentioned the 4 no's, which I think could be repeated by the Biden administration, which is no regime change, no regime collapse, no accelerated reunification, and no U.S. troops crossing the demilitarized zone. Now, President Biden has already insulted the Russian president. He's insulted the Chinese president. He's insulted Kim Jong-un as a Hitler and as a thug. And then how does one expect to have a meaningful dialogue when the leader of one country, the main interlocutor, is insulting the others and then inviting them to a dialogue? So President Biden, I think, who's known for rash decisions and basically insulting foreign leaders, needs also to be restrained. We criticize President Trump quite justifiably, but President Biden is no angel either. He's not going to wave a magic wand and things are going to fall into place. So we have a lot of hard work ahead. We need to sit down seriously. When the IAEA was working with the North Koreans, the IAEA had pretty good outcomes in terms of the implementation of what was agreed. It's when the politics went sour between the United States and the DPRK that the verification arrangements carried out by the IAEA also fell apart.
Robert, we just have about a minute left. Let me just ask you, Seoul has pushed for re-engagement with Pyongyang and has urged the international community to ease sanctions and to provide more aid for North Koreans. Are we going to see that happen?
No. The U.S. government is still committed to denuclearization and a pretty robust form of it at that. World opinion, I think, broadly is on the side of that, too. The South Korean president went to Europe a couple of years ago and tried to get the Europeans to sort of budge on sanctions. They didn't. The Japanese won't budge on it either. Even the Chinese have voted for the sanctions of the UN Security Council, even if they don't really enforce them as well as they might. Maybe the North Koreans can sort of signal to us that they're going to budge a little bit or something like that. But I think just too many countries in the world, too many people in the world are too scared with North Korea having an unchecked nuclear program, and so I think sanctions are going to be used as sort of a chip to get the North Koreans to behave better on nuclear weapons.
All right, we've run out of time, so we're going to have to leave the conversation there. Thanks so much to our guests, Yang Uk, Robert Kelly, and Tariq Rauf. And thank you, too, for watching. You can see this and all our previous programs again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Mohammed, Jamjoom, and the whole team here, bye for now.